Hi everyone, in today's hobby video I'm going to show you how to paint Inquisitor Eisenhorn. I've listened to all the audiobooks and I love the story, so I thought I'd add this model to my Astra Militarum army. This is a high precision detailed kit with some beautiful elements that I really wanted to showcase. I consider myself a decent but not amazing painter, so I feel this is helpful to anybody of a similar level to me. New to my channel, I focus on everything Astra Militarum, including hobby, tactics and lore. If you feel like supporting me, you can do so with a like, by subscribing or sponsoring me on Patreon. A link is below. So quickly unboxing it, this 10-piece kit comes with a pretty straightforward set of instructions, which also has its data sheet in several different languages. If you want the complete Inquisitor rules, you're going to have to buy the Psychic Awakening Farrier Supplementary Rulebook. Now the model itself is resin, so you need to soak it in warm soapy water before painting. You can see it's very different to regular GW kits, with a lot of more sprue to cut away. A lot of the parts are super fine detail, so when you're cutting away the sprue, be very precise and accurate when you take it off. Likewise, when you remove mold lines, you need to be super careful as well, because some of the parts are very high detail. So given how detailed this model is, I really want to nail the paint scheme. And I'm opting for painting a lot of the parts individually before assembly. You can see I've mounted each on wine corks using some thin wire and drilling out part of the model piece, holding it in place. I had trouble getting his torso to fit perfectly in place, so I had to fill in some green stuff on the side in between the sword and his cloak. So I undercoat the entire miniature except for his head with Abaddon Black. A key note with a model of such detail is to make sure your paint is always thinned. It's better to apply several thin coats than one thick coat where you'll lose all the detail. I then look to paint the hardest to reach parts, starting with his trousers using Corvus Black. At the same time you can also paint his gloves as well. Then using Corax White, I paint his inner long coat. Mr. Eisenhorn is very well dressed with what seems to be a multi-layered coat. What a gentleman. I actually leave a little black border around the edge of the Corvus White. Next I paint his boots in rhino hide, and you can also do his pistol holster as well. Now using Mephiston Red, I paint the various inner parts of his multi-layered cloak. The inner trim is visible on his chest, and obviously also on both his arms, his jacket cuff, his collar, his sword handle, and of course the bottom of the inside of the coat. And while you're at it, you can also paint the red wax seal on his left shoulder pad. So the red done, I now use Corax White again to paint what could be described as the cummerbund on his waist, and you can also do the pages of the book attached to his waist, and the front section of the skull on his rune staff, and the purity seal on his left shoulder pad. I then start to pick out all the silver detail using lead belcher. There are the buckles and skulls on his boots, the end of the sword scabbard, the buckle on his chest, his belt, the rune staff, bolt pistol, and of course his shoulder pads. Now to the gold details using Retributor armor on the rope hanging on his right shoulder, the Inquisition symbol on his chest, sword handle, and bolt pistol body. There is also gold trim on his collar, and of course also his rune staff, and the gold detail on the Inquisition scrolls on his back and his left arm. Likewise, the book on his waist has also got a gold trim, and there's also the Imperial Aquila on his belt as well. Now the grid on his shoulder guards, and also that on the Inquisition scrolls. I'm using Stegodon Scale Green for this. Staying with green, also there is the Electrobane grenade on his back, which I paint with wire flesh. Right, so with the majority of the initial detail done, now onto the gold of his artificial bolt pistol. There is some beautiful detail on the body of the weapon, so I dry brush using Segmarite and repeat the process on the rune staff and Inquisition symbol on his chest. Now to help the fine details stand out, I use Nuln oil on all the relevant recesses. Now you can't apply this wholesale on the model, but carefully applying it instead in any areas you want to embed detail, like where his trousers join his boots. Use it also on his front with all the detail on his chest, and likewise carefully tracing along the metal on his shoulder guards. Of course, there's also the other metal components on his equipment, including the bolt pistol and rune staff. I then darken the reds using Nuln oil, and the key here is to ensure you get an even finish. Don't apply too much and avoid any pooling. Try to always pull your brush in one direction downwards. I then also use the shade Agrex Earthshade on his bolt pistol body, and likewise on the Inquisition symbol on his chest as well. So with the shades dry, you can see how much they make the fine detail pop. It does, however, of course, really dampen the mini. So now to the most lengthy part of the process, edge highlighting. For this, I switched to my extra small Artificer layer brush. So to start off, I do the hard to reach parts again, starting with his trousers using Eshin Grey. Then Dunbar Brown, initially on the edges of his boots, followed up with Mornfang Brown on top of that to give them a bit of a really scuffed up look. Now using Evil Sun Scarlet, I do all the edges of the red. Need to be super accurate here. Take your time and notice how I stabilise my right hand up against the cork in my left hand. If you start getting the shakes, just take a time out and have a breather. With that dry, I now use the shade Castora Yellow over all those areas I've just highlighted. Again, don't use too much and ensure you apply an even coat. Next, to brighten the metallic areas, I simply use Lead Belcher again on the bolt pistol and chain on his book, for example. Likewise on the gold, I use Retributor Armor again, and the gold trim on his coat cuffs will need particular attention, and you have to use a very steady hand when carefully highlighting these. Now it's the black on his coat. Using Dark Reaper, paint the folds and creases. You're looking for where the light naturally reflects, and again be super precise, always pulling the brush in one direction. Remember again to stabilise your brush hand in place. Then it's Fantastically Grey to do all the extreme edges on the creases and edges of his coat as well. Don't forget any buttons and the folds on the clothing on his chest and front of the model. Now if you do make any mistakes when highlighting, maybe you put too much paint or too much grey in one spot, you can of course touch up with Abaddon Black, like I am here. So at this point I part assemble the Mini. To be honest, I did this simply because I wanted to see what he looks like part assembled. I've been working on him now for about 5 days, so I was getting a bit impatient, to be honest. So then the skull on his rune staff. I create the darkness in the eye sockets and nose hole, anturating edges with Noon Oil, and then touch up with Korox White. Now the next few parts are completely optional. I tried to create a well-worn look on his coat, but putting small marks on the edges of his coat to try and simulate where the leather has been damaged. You need to make sure the tip of your brush is super sharp, and use Dark Reaper and Fantastically Grey again. I did an okay job on the edges of the coat, but lesser so on the creases, which you'll see once he's all finished. And then as per the image in the instructions, there are markings on his rune staff, probably ancient inscriptions to help him harness the power of the warp when he accesses the Immaterium. I tried to recreate random symbols with dashes and crosses, and as you see a bit later, I think I did an okay job here. Likewise on his blessing paper, I tried to simulate the text that's written, and again I think my efforts were definitely worth it. I tried this last part simply because I want to get better at precision painting, and I'm all about learning something new every time I paint a new Mini. Now with shoulder guards. These are an area where I'm probably the most happy about, because I haven't been able to achieve basic levels of shading before. So to start, apply a Kalia green shade focusing on the edges and the bottom part of the shoulder guards. Then using Stegodon Scale Green, apply a layer at the bottom again. Now you mix your Stegodon Scale Green and Temple Guard Blue on your palette. You can see I'm mixing them in gradual parts, giving me a brighter and darker part of the mix. With that, I'm then doing individual smaller coats, gradually building from darkest at the bottom to brightest at the top of the shoulder guard. You want the paint to be somewhat lacquery-like, so don't forget to mix in some water. Then to reinforce the edges, again use Kalia green shade. And last and by no means least, painting his head. I'll keep this pretty brief as I'm by no means an expert here. I'll put in the description below links to some other tutorials if you want to see more advanced ways of painting heads. So I've undercoated his entire head with Korox White. I paint his hair with Abaddon Black and his skin with Bugman's Glow. Then using the shade Reikland Flesh Shade, I carefully apply this all over his skin, ensuring it nicely settles in any natural recesses like his cheeks. Now I use Cadian flesh tones that I've mixed with Bugman's Glow and start picking out the facial features like his nose, cheekbone and brow. Try to apply the same principles we used on the shoulder guards, building up the brightness up to the highest points on his face. Don't use straight Cadian flesh tone as it's too bright, if that makes sense. Then reconfirm all the recesses with carefully placed Reikland flesh shade again. Okay, now the eyes. Given how tiny this area is, be prepared to rework the process a few times. Start with Abaddon Black to fill out his eye sockets. Try to make sure that the areas painted are symmetrical on both eye sockets. Then paint a smaller amount of Koroks white in this black area. You want to have a line of black surrounding the whites of his eyes. If you put too much white, either start the process again, or try touching up the black if you can paint the surrounding black line. Now his pupils. Your brush needs to be at its sharpest point now. The approach I take is the first pupil I paint dictates the way he looks. As you can see, his left eye is looking to the left, which means I need to get his right eye to do the same likewise. This sounds obvious, but it means you can be more relaxed on the first eye you paint, but you need to absolutely nail the second eye perfectly. Nothing worse than a cross eye or fish-faced mini. So you can see I've inadvertently made him looking to the left, which is okay, as you'll see in a minute that the angle I put his head is looking that way and looks quite natural. And for his hair, I create a slightly greying look with small streaks of Eshin grey and some tiny blobs of Koroks white. And the very last, of course, is his base. I won't go through painting this, but I will say that after painting Eisenhorn, it'll feel like the easiest thing you've ever painted, with nice big surface areas. Okay, so let's see what he now looks like. So I'm proud to say it's probably my best mini to date. I hope this inspires and helps you if you're going to paint Gregor Eisenhorn. I think if you're used to painting the tiny Astra Militarum infantry models, the detail here shouldn't be too challenging. The key piece will be making it pop, which is where the majority of the painting time goes. Let's hopefully you enjoyed this, and any questions about the process let me know. If you've painted Eisenhorn, please share photos on Instagram. A link to my Insta profile is below. So my channel focuses on Astra Militarum, with hobby, tactics and lore videos. And obviously Eisenhorn is from the Inquisition, but for any Astra Militarum players, hopefully this is enjoyable seeing a different high detail model being painted. So if you enjoyed this and want to support me, you can do so by leaving a like, subscribing or sponsoring me on Patreon. A link is below. Thanks for watching, see you next time.